Don't start yet. Take a deep breath and go.
Orpheus, he played the harp, and the harp was his light and his life until he met Eurydice, who soon became his wife. Now Orpheus was the child of Apollo and Calliope, so the gods themselves came down from Olympus to attend the wedding, and Hymen himself, the god of marriage, carried the wedding torch. But the torch smoked and guttered, and tears came to the wedding guests' eyes, a bad omen. A bad omen.
A very bad omen of a dog eating cake.
For me.
A bad omen and soon fulfilled. A bad omen and soon fulfilled. The day of her wedding, Eurydice, dancing, stepped upon a snake, and the snake bit her. And she died. And Orpheus sang his grief to men and kings and to the gods themselves. But all of them said to him, Orpheus, she is dead. This is the way of life. You are living. So live. But Orpheus would not hear of it. Finally, he found the way into Hades, and with a single torch and his harp, he went in. The cold breath of the cave fluttered his pale torch, and he went down and down, always spiraling inward, until he saw a red glow. He stepped slowly around the corner, and he saw a hairy back ahead, and then it was Kerberos! Lunging toward him, all three heads, the hound of hell! Lunging short by his change, and Orpheus cowered in the corner. But Orpheus, he played the harp, and he thought of the dog chained all alone in the endless dark forever. So he played, and he sang of dogs. Dogs running in the sun and playing with each other. And Kerberos, always chained, sat down. And Orpheus sang of dogs with their masters, getting petted and getting scratched in that spot behind the ear. Dogs all full with their dinner, and Kerberos, always lonely, lay down, whimpering. And Orpheus sang and played of dogs asleep by the fire, warm and full. And Kerberos, always hungry, wine, and all three heads went to sleep. And Orpheus crept around the huge beast, and now he followed the pale red glow. Soon enough, as he spiraled down and spiraled in, he came to a river. And at the river was a boatman and a boat. He stepped upon the boat, but the boat rocked and swayed beneath his weight. And the blind boatman turned and said to him, "Living man, get off my boat. I only ferry the dead." But then Orpheus pulled out a bow of holly and handed it to the blind man, and he said, "You are wise, perhaps, but this is the bow of gold, the fee for the living." Very well. And he began to pull Orpheus across the river. And Orpheus played and sang of winds, ships, and the sea. And when he stopped, the blind man was crying and said, "Please, play on." At last he reached the other shore. He stepped off the boat, which dipped and swayed again, and there were all the ghosts, the shades of the dead. And they all saw him, and they said, "Oh, Living man, tell us, what happens in Athens? What happens with my wife? How go my children, my farm? Tell me of the outer world. And they gathered upon him in their tens and their dozens, and their 20s and their hundreds and their thousands, bid fair to suffocate him. But Orpheus, he played the harp, and he played a day's work. The day's long work at the farm. And they stopped and were quiet. And he played of the night's sweet rest after a long day's hard work, and they backed away. He played the ages of man from babe to grave, and they formed a path before him, and he walked through, singing and playing of people and pestilence, with all her rats and always scratching, got up and followed him. Famine, always hungry, got up and followed him. And the Furies, the kindly ones, who never forgive and never forget, stopped what they were doing and followed him. He played and he sang until he reached 2 enormous steel doors, studded with every gem imaginable. The dead pushed them open. He strode in with triumph in his voice, and there was Hades himself. And Orpheus froze, heart and hand and voice between Hades' spearing gaze. Living man! Who are you? And what is this you do in my realm, upsetting my laws and my traditions? Orpheus took a deep breath, and he played the harp. And he sang and he played of how short life is, how his bride had been taken from him so quickly, the thread of her life unraveled by a snake, and he begged, since all people die, and everyone ends up in Hades' realm, for him to give her back to him for only a short while, only a short brief span of life, or he would stay and let him be dead himself. And when he finished singing and playing, Persephone was crying openly, and Hades, well, a single steel tear came down his cheek. Very well, living man. We will give you what you ask. But there is a price. There is always a price. You may have your bride, Eurydice, but she will follow you up to the upper world. Do not halt. Do not speak. Do not turn around. Once you are both in the sunlight, she is yours. Halt. Speak. Turn around before that, and she is mine. So Orpheus left the room, and Hades pointed, take that path. All paths lead to the upper world. He took the different path, always spiraling up and always spiraling out. He walked for hours, silent. He was silent, and silence walked behind him. He thought it was all a trick. He was played for the fool. Hades hadn't set Eurydice behind him. There was nothing behind him. No one, nothing. Wait, was that a scream? Could that be Eurydice? But there were no footsteps. He didn't notice, but the cave grew lighter. He was tricked. He was fooled. Eurydice was not behind him. What would he do? But he did not speak. He did not stop. He did not turn around. Birdsong began to fill the air. What would he do without Eurydice? What would he do? Surely she was not behind him. He's finally stepped out onto grass. He noticed the grass. He was on grass, and he turned and he looked around, and there was Eurydice. But she was still underground. And she disappeared as quickly as she had been seen. And Orpheus His grief had been great before, but now it swallowed him up. He avoided the abodes of living man and lived on a mountain, singing only to animals, rocks, and plants. And when the daughters of the frenzy came, who were inspired by Bacchus, he did not leave. He knew they were coming. They tore him to shreds and killed him, and so he died. And so he died, and went into the realm of Hades, and there on the fields of Elysium he met Eurydice. And they have wandered the fields of Elysium from that day to this, and he looks upon her long, and he looks upon her often, and now there is no penalty for an early look. And that is the end of the story.